Head sõbrad, tere tulemast täna õhtu viimasele paneelile, pärast mida jätkub siin kultuuriprogramm, nii et ärge kohe pärast meie vestlust ära minge. Ja ma loodan, et teid tuleb veel juurde ja juurde. See on viimane eestikeelne avaldus, mille ma selle vestluse käigus teen, tegemist on ingliskeelse paneeliga. Ja ma teen selle eesti keeles sellepärast, et osundada need meie seast, kes tunnevad, et neil oleks abi sünkroontõlkest, siis meil pakutakse ka sünkroontõlget, selle jaoks peate tulema siia suure ekraani alla, kus meie abilised annavad teile sünkroontõlke aparaadid. Welcome to the discussion. I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing an outstanding panel. If I were to read out all of my colleagues' resumes, then we would spend the whole time just reading the resumes. They're all extremely experienced diplomats, collectively having served in all the continents of the world except for Australia and Antarctica, representing 4 continents: North America, Europe, South America, and Asia. And I'll be very brief in introducing all of them because we want to get to the substance of the discussion. I also want to make the administrative remark in the very beginning that we'll try to keep the moderated discussion here to roughly an hour, and then go to you, the audience, for your comments and questions for our distinguished panelists. So it is a pleasure for me to welcome first the ambassador of Chile, residing in Helsinki, serving here, covering Finland and Estonia since 2022, Ambassador Belén Sapag, who most recently was ambassador to Austria, Slovenia, and Slovakia, has also served as permanent representative to the United Nations and other international organizations in Vienna, served in New York City, covering the United Nations there, in Argentina, in Malaysia, is a lawyer by training and has also studied social sciences and diplomacy, representing South America. To her left, Ambassador George Kent from the United States has been in Tallinn since January 2023. Most recently was in Washington as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Europe and Eurasia, covering, amongst others, Ukraine and Ukrainian issues, has served twice in Thailand, twice in Ukraine. So this is his first of 2 postings in Estonia, I presume, because you do things in pairs. Has also served in Warsaw, Poland, and Tashkent, Uzbekistan. He's an expert of international affairs, not just by profession, but also by training from Harvard and Johns Hopkins, and also from the United Kingdom, from Edinburgh, if I remember correctly. To his left, representing India, Ambassador Kumar has been in Tallinn since 2022. As I think India's first ambassador residing in Tallinn, Estonia. Has served on almost every continent the other group collectively has served in Mexico City, Mexico, in Buenos Aires, Argentina, in Bern, Switzerland, in Accra, Ghana, and most recently was India's High Commissioner to Brunei. By training, a physicist and also a lawyer. And last but not least, from the United Kingdom, His Majesty's ambassador to Estonia since 2021. Most recently served as Deputy Consul General in New York City. Has served in the United States before in the British Embassy in Washington, D.C., but also in Jerusalem, Israel. Has also extensive experience in trade, investment banking, and has served as the private secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. By training, theologist.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah. Theologist. So questions related to those matters shall be addressed to His Majesty's ambassador. So this is the group. Almost all continents of the world, with extensive experience from almost all continents of the world, and now serving in Estonia or covering Estonia for quite some time already, since 2021, 22, or early 23. And instead of discussing global affairs and the situation in the world, we will be discussing Estonia. And the reason why we'll be discussing in Estonia, and you probably experienced this during your extensive time here in Estonia already, we really like ourselves. And we also like talking about ourselves. And perhaps this is something that has something to do with the fact that we're a relatively small country, 1,000 times smaller than India by population, 50 times smaller than the United Kingdom, roughly 280 times smaller than the United States, and I would say 20 times smaller than Chile. We are almost obsessed with the question of what do other people around the world think about us? What do they think about us? And we're almost always convinced that most of the people around the world, from India to Chile to the United States and the United Kingdom, spend at least some of their spare time discussing Estonia-related issues. Be it our rally drivers or the fact that Skype was invented in Estonia or whatnot. So I will obviously open with a question to each and every one of you. What do you think about us? But in order to also, I should also say as a caveat, everything you say will be in your personal capacities, so you can truly speak freely. It's only recorded and transmitted online. But seriously, I mean, we're not kidding ourselves. Most of us intelligent people here in Arvamusfestival, we understand that people around kitchen tables in India don't probably spend every evening discussing Estonia. But there must be something that your general public thinks about Estonia. And if not, then certainly there are expert communities in your foreign service or in your think tank communities, in your universities, people who you interact with today as ambassadors back home, who cover either Europe or Eastern Europe, Northeastern Europe, the Baltic states, Estonia specifically. What is it that what's our image? And what can we do to either enhance it or promote ourselves better in your countries? And I'll start with Chile, and we will then go down the order. So, Ambassador, what do you think about us?
Well, Tere, I'm very happy to be here, and thank you, Jonatan, for having us and the ministry and the organizers. Well, obviously, if I can relate a little bit what a Chilean or a South American would think of an Estonian, it would be somebody from a very far away country from Europe, very European, you know, like some would relate to the Hanseatic League or something of the like. But going a little bit further to people that work in the, you know, in the international arena, or some of my students in the diplomatic academy and so forth, I think there's a distinctive, qualifier of Estonians particularly is that sense of freedom within. You know, it's not an individuality, but it's the fact that Estonians are very tough in a spirit, you know, like very libertarian, you know, like it's a sense of liberty and of self-worth. That is something that is also very striking in the international arena when you have diplomats like you or others, is how you seek results. And that means that you're not afraid of doing things. But I would think a little bit further. Recently, I was in the Estonian National Museum. We were there with a group of pilots from Chile that participated in the rally. They didn't do so well as your champion and the Finnish champion, but we got to see how the spirit of Estonia is there. You know, we visited an exhibit of scarves that showed the designs talked about liberty in a certain time of your history. So then I could relate it with this idea that I had been, carrying of the Estonians. But I would say that the individuality, the strength, and on the other side, I think it's, sometimes we believe that you're very individualistic, but at the same time, you're very, maybe you work very well together when you need to work together. And that also shows in, let's say, in your dance, in your singing. So I think you have a certain duality, individuality, but at the same time, when you need to do something in the sake of community, you do it because you believe in it. not because you're mandated to do it. And that's how I think that we see Estonians, apart from all the other, the cyber things, etc. And there's one thing that in Chile, in the press, sometimes we see very much the fact that the Estonians are the tallest people in the world. But, I have not been able to assess that yet. So that's how probably we see, but it's a spirit of liberty always within. That I think is something characteristic.
Can I just follow up real quick? In the expert community, are we seen as part of Europe, Northern Europe, the Baltic states?
Yes.
Where do you place us on your political mental map?
Well, the common Latin America, I think, would say European, Nordic. But then, if you go, maybe people that are more into social studies would say Baltic. So, and now, more recently, there has been a lot in the press. Your prime minister has written a lot, so that has been in the press. So now there's a strong understanding that you're, in a very interesting frontier, just not to say...
That we have a neighbor.
Yeah, that you have a neighbor, yeah.
I'm not referring to Latvia.
Yeah.
Ambassador Kent? Every American obviously discusses Estonian affairs at the kitchen table, right?
Well, there are 27,000 Estonian Americans. So that is, and particularly if people live in places like Maryland and New Jersey, the chances are they could bump into a neighbor who would tell them about Estonia and talked about Estonia as a country even during occupation. So I would start with that. It's not the biggest diaspora, but it had a voice. I think if you ask, you already mentioned, I think, probably the most common Estonian tag or brand in the US, and that would be Skype, which has been bought out by Microsoft. But I think that did put Estonia on the map for a lot of people, particularly when Skype was a leader in sort of, I guess, voice over internet protocol, whatever the term is. The other element, which it depends on whether someone either listens to music with knowledge or listens to music. Arvo Pärt was the most listened living composer from 2011 to 2019. I'm sure almost every American would have said John Williams, which wrote many of the soundtracks for big movies. But a lot of the movies in the teens actually used Arvo Pärt's music and not John Williams' music. And so I think particularly anyone who sings or appreciates music knows him. And even those that don't, the earworms in their ears actually is Arvo Pärt. And so I think those would be the popular brand identities that Estonia means something to people who don't think about international relations. Those of us who do and are experts, if you will, the expert community, I would say that Estonia is very well known for particularly two issues, and this gets into, I think, the title of this discussion. One is Estonia made a big bet in the 90s on digital governance and really became a world leader. The previous panel in English on Ukraine, Kam August, mentioned how the Ukrainians took that and then flipped it and advanced it to a mobile digital state, which is a sort of combined Estonian Ukrainian lesson for the rest of us. That was combined, I think, after the Russian cyber attacks in 2007 into developing cyber defense. And the Cyber Defense Center of Excellence here, although affiliated with NATO, helps countries and with partners in other continents. So I think that's one branding where Estonia created ideas and exported knowledge for collective benefit. And then the other is more recent, and that has to do with what's going on with Russia's war in Ukraine. I think Estonia has become what I would call a thought leader, coming up with ideas on how the collective we can help Ukraine and how the collective we can deal with Russia's aggression, its breaking of international norms, and how do we hold those who deserve to be held to account, and then how do we help Ukraine in those very many ways, not just to survive, but to win, to recover, to rebuild. And I think Estonia has a lot to offer to the collective doing things that the international community needs to accomplish.
Well, you touched upon both themes in the actual topic of the panel, a unicorn or a hawk. Let me ask you about the unicorn part. So I remember when I was ambassador to the United States, what ambassadors do is tell the story of their country, basically. It's part of the job, at least. It's telling the story of their country. And the Estonian story, for me, always was based on two big pillars, one of which was the digital story, how we created from scratch a digital government that not only makes life easier for people, but also saves us a ton of money. And I was always concerned, and there is a concern in the Estonian society to a certain extent, that the digital tiger, as we call it, might no longer be as powerful as it was in the early 2000s, that the digital story is no longer, in the context of Estonia, is no longer telling itself as well as it did in the early 2000s or 2010s, that we haven't really done much to add things to the digital story, that the story might run out and then we would be in trouble. Would you share that analysis, or do you sense that the story, the digital aspects of the Estonian digital state, or that story is still selling well?
Innovation, particularly in the digital sphere, has to be relentless to survive. And whether it's chip memory having to double every 18 months, or it's developing new platforms where you can't just rely on a legacy system. And so I think that issue of innovating or dying is built into the ethos of people working in the IT sector, whether they're here in, or not here in Paide, Tallinn, Tartu, wherever in Estonia, if they're in Silicon Valley or elsewhere. When I came out in January, before I had a conversation with US senators who had to approve my nomination, just gathering statistics, at the turn of the year, the total amount of Estonian direct investment in the United States exceeded now the US investment in Estonia. It's a good news story. What it means is, in sort of classic economic theory, there are different competencies, and there are tremendously successful Estonian companies who are investing in the US in the same way that Microsoft bought out Skype here in Estonia. And that means that tech entrepreneurs, including companies that people might not have heard of, have made so much money here in Estonia that they're going to invest in the huge market that is the United States. And so I think whether or not it's in the national consciousness, the fact that almost $500 million of investment in the United States comes from Estonia shows that there still is this dynamism. If Skype were the first to be known, I think Estonia has developed a total of 11 so-called unicorn billion-dollar valuations over the years, the highest per capita. Again, a small country that can accomplish something. And so those other countries are also companies are also making their own contributions. And for instance, when all my friends from the US and Western Europe come, I say, before you arrive, make sure you download Bolt. And that's not just for Estonia. This is this whole region. And so that's probably, I would say, the next app or Estonian product that has hit that critical global consciousness, because Bolt is also useful in other continents, not just in Central Europe. So I think what it is, you have a great education system that scores well in the international standards, and then Estonians have the freedom to create value and then hopefully to monetize it.
So the story is still selling?
Well, the story has to continue. There's no end of history, and there's no end to a single company. If you don't innovate, you do die in the digital economy.
Ambassador Kumar, can you give us the Indian perspective on Estonia?
Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here in Paide, in this lovely Opinion Festival. See, when we say India, we are looking at 1.4 billion people. And India lives across a very diverse section. So when a word called Estonia is uttered, the interpretations vary. To some, the simple answer will be, I don't know. You go further, it must be one country. You go to a more educated class, yes, there is one country called Estonia, somewhere in Europe. Then you move on and you come down to a focus lot. India itself is a very major ICT player. So you come down to this domain. And the immediate answer you will get, yes, it is a digital powerhouse. It's doing very well. A country which has got more unicorns per capita, as rightly stated by my colleague, and a country which is doing very well in e-governance. The country, in a very short span, has literally propelled itself at the international arena. And on a lighter note, your country is also known across people who have traveled, who have seen the world, as a country of rock stars because of your singing ability. We all remember that you got yourself the freedom, through this long chain amongst all the 3 Baltic nations. And this is something which is cherished and, appreciated by the people. Estonian models and Estonian sports people have been known.
Yes.
And another factor which sometimes we tend to forget, I come from India, where we gave ourselves Madam Indira Gandhi, the first female prime minister. She was the second woman leader in the world. Madam Bandra Naike, who was the president of Sri Lanka, just preceded her as the first world's, leader, political leader. And you were a country where, till only very recently, we had 2 female personalities donning the 2 premier roles of the country, the president and the prime minister, for a brief while, but you had it. So Estonia in India is regarded with a lot of admiration and respect for the path which you have traveled after your restoration of democracy. We value, in a nutshell, I would say, we value your progress and the path which you have paved in such a short time for yourself, and I see a bright future.
We're all free market-based democracies here, represented on the stage. And all of you who have spoken until now have made reference to the digital development of Estonia. And I presume that all of your tasks involve, at least to a certain extent, business diplomacy, finding business opportunities for your companies, maybe investments from Estonia or helping your investments here. And a lot of things seem to match. But Ambassador Kumar, I'd like to ask you, since you represent the largest by population country here, how big a problem do you sense is the capacity difference between our countries? Because I remember oftentimes in the United States, when I, again, represented Estonia in the United States, I came across situations where an Estonian company entered the United States with great hopes. There were welcoming counterparts in the United States who wanted to do business, and then sooner rather than later it became apparent that they needed to produce something of the magnitude that we're just simply unable to accomplish. I presume you must be getting questions from Indian companies regarding Estonia. How often do you think this becomes the problem, that we are 1,000 times smaller than you are, that we may be able to conduct business cooperation, but we simply cannot reach the level of capacity that is required for instance, entering the Indian market? Is that an issue at all? Size?
Let me put this question in another format. You said you're 1,000 times smaller. That is true. But the point is that 1,000 times of numbers gives you an opportunity to make use of the scale of the Indian market. You are a country which is developing niche technologies. You have become experts in certain domains. Your innovative nature, especially what I see from University of Tartu and Tallinn Institute of Technology, are the fulcrum, what you get out of these universities post-research and development is what you need to multiply in a bigger market space. So what India provides, I think there is a complementarity. What you need to do is to find your right partner in a market. Today, Indian market, middle class market is roughly 700 million strong and growing. So in that market, if you can propel yourself and find the right partner, I think there is a future for both of us to develop and progress. I see it a matter of complementarity rather than, looking at the dimensions of population.
Ambassador Allen, the only European on the panel. Now, we may excuse the South Americans, Indians, and Americans when they can't locate Estonia on the map. For other Europeans, you won't get off that easily. What do the British think about Estonia? How well known are we? And what can we do to be better?
Okay, Jonatan, first of all, thank you for having me this evening. It's great to be here. It's great to see so many familiar faces in the audience as well, and I think this event is fantastic.
5% of our population represented.
I thought I'd speak briefly about what I knew before I actually got here as ambassador, and then talk about sort of how I feel about Estonia now. So before I turned up about 2 years ago as the British ambassador here, I had never been here. I couldn't visit ahead of coming as ambassador because of COVID. There weren't really any flights, etc. So I think back to then and what I knew of Estonia, and a bit like one or two of the other panelists, for me, growing up, one of the formative things was watching on television in the late 80s. I was sort of 10, 11 years old, watching the Baltic Way, the Singing Revolution and so on, and being inspired by the courage of Estonians and Latvians and Lithuanians then. Also e-Estonia, that had made its way into my consciousness, that there was this thing called sort of e-Estonia. I remember in London at the time, there were adverts for Bolt on the tube in London, and they would make a thing of the fact that Bolt was from Estonia. And people have told me that was quite a new thing. In the past, maybe Estonian companies might have hidden the fact that they were Estonian, but Bolt 3 years ago was sort of making a thing of its Estonianness. And also I knew that we had troops here. I knew that we had British soldiers out here in Estonia. So that was my knowledge then, prior to coming here. Now, having lived here for 2 years, I live here with my family, it's quite hard to put into words how much I like Estonia. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I love being here. It's a privilege. The last time that George and I were here on this stage, we were stood behind me singing in our choir in Estonian. And
two choir singers here on the stage, the American and the British ambassador.
Yeah, George was singing a lot better than I was. So he is a much more accomplished and better baritone than I am.
But Ross understood what we were singing.
That's a slight difference. But I'm not going to go on at this stage about all the reasons why I love Estonia. That can maybe come later. But safe to say that the more that I've learned about Estonia, the more I've come to appreciate it, and I think it's fantastic. If you talk about British people now, or regular people back home in the UK, I think they do know a fair bit about Estonia. I think lots of people in the UK know where Estonia is. They know the digital stuff. They really appreciate your strong position in terms of Russia and Ukraine, all the Estonian assistance to Ukraine, etc. I think a big thing that's made a difference in the last couple of years of people's knowledge of Estonia has been your Prime Minister. I think she's done an incredible job of representing Estonia internationally. She's often on the media, or in the media in the UK, in the newspapers, on TV, on the radio, and I think she's an incredibly powerful advocate for Estonia, so I think that's made a big difference. In terms of expert knowledge, you asked about what people, maybe in our foreign ministry or our defence ministry think. I think there's just a huge level of appreciation for Estonian expertise. There is, I think, a widespread view that Estonia has been proven right about the threat posed by Russia and what Russia is really like. I think largely in our expert community, we always thought that you were right. But I think internationally, people now think you were right, and people think we should listen to you. And maybe the final thing at this stage of the conversation, I think people think that you were right earlier about Russia, but also we should listen to you now. It's no good saying, oh, it's great that Estonia and the other Baltic states were correct about Russia a few years ago, but I think also it's important that we listen to you today about what's happening and really listen to your sort of expert perspective on that. So I hope that helps answer your question as a start.
Oh, it absolutely does. And you almost answered my first follow-up question. Wouldn't have been a question, it was a comment. You said it yourself. I remember it was about the war, the escalation since our Independence Day of last year in Ukraine had already taken place. And in the first few months, we heard a lot of speeches by political leaders from around the world mentioning Estonia or the Baltic states collectively and saying that we should have listened to you because you were right. Which frankly, to a certain extent, frustrated us because, our counterpoint was always what you just said. We're still right. Listen to us now. It's not about the past. It's about the present and the future. But I was going to. You also mentioned the military cooperation between our countries. You have what close to or even above 1,000 soldiers stationed.
Right now, about 850.
850 stationed here in Estonia. I know the United States soldiers in Estonia, but I remember. During the Cold War, the Americans had hundreds of thousands of soldiers with their families in Europe. And I remember in the 1990s and later on in the 2000s, 2010s, one of the concerns in the transatlantic community on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean in the United States was that now that the United States military presence in Europe had gone down, that eventually over time it would diminish the people-to-people contacts that were forged over the 5 decades because of that military presence. That since there are less people with direct knowledge of Europe, direct experience of having lived in Europe, gone to school in Europe, perhaps that would over time erode the relationship. I'm not sure whether this is true or not, but the situation with the United Kingdom and us is opposite from that. It's not just the 800 plus soldiers that are here today, they keep rotating in and out. So I may be getting the numbers wrong, but over time, a good, significant percentage of the British Army has done a tour of duty here in Estonia. They don't have their families with them, and that's the difference from the Cold War days. But still, they go back, they talk about their experience here. How important do you think is this military component in forging not just the defense ties between our countries, where allies obviously are very strong? How important do you find the military component in just bridging our two countries closer together culturally and on a human-to-human level?
I think it makes a huge difference. I think at the moment our presence is our largest overseas military presence.
Globally?
Globally. Since 2017, we think about 11,000 British troops have cycled through Estonia at some point. It's probably about 15% over time of our army and of our actual sort of combat fighting units. It's a bigger percentage. While they're here, they don't just stay in Tapa or in the training area. They visit the rest of Estonia. They get operational stand-downs. They get leave periods. And when I go and talk to them when they arrive, I say to them, make the most of being here. Go and look around. I've given our Army and Navy and RAF personnel personally sort of tours of the old town in Tallinn. I tell them the best other places to go. Lots of them will have their family come out and visit them here, and they will look around, they'll go down to Tartu, and I think that builds that link, that sort of people-to-people link. So I think it makes an enormous difference, and it really helps promote the ties between the two countries.
So, I mean, you mentioned the choir singing aspects. We're grateful for your contribution to our choir singing tradition, by the way, I should say. But I'll continue, Ambassador Ala, with you, and just on a more personal level. I know bigger countries have more opportunities than us in the Estonian Foreign Service to train your diplomats before a posting. I know the Americans, you get months that you can spend in the Foreign Service Institute to study the language and the culture of the country that you're going to. We in Estonia have less time for that, but still, before posting to another country, you read up, you study up, you try to find out as much as you can. And Ross, you mentioned that you had never been to Estonia before.
No.
And I think many of you had not been to Estonia before. Now you live here. or close by in Helsinki and come here very, very often. Could you tell us one example of what's surprised you most, either positively or negatively, after actually getting here and living and working amongst us, either with regard to Estonia in general, or Estonia's foreign policy positions, or political life, or whatnot? What has been the biggest eye-opener?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I knew I was coming about a year ahead. So in our system, you find out where you're going slightly ahead of time. I was lucky in a way. I was in New York at the time. I couldn't really do my job that I had in New York because COVID had hit. My job involved going and talking to businesses. Can't really do that if you're stuck in your apartment. And I thought, I will start learning Estonian via Zoom, which a few months later I looked up how hard Estonian was. And at that point, I regretted having started learning it. But I thought, once you've started, you might as well keep going. So I thought I'd learn as much as I could about the country, start learning the language. But actually, coming here, I didn't really know what to expect. I have to confess, we landed on I remember it was a Thursday evening. We landed on the sort of direct flight from London. And we basically, I've got 3 quite small kids. So we got to a hotel, just went straight to sleep, tried to get the kids to sleep. The next morning, we went to the residence where we now live, and we sort of put all our stuff away, and then we thought we should go and explore. And someone had told us that there was a nice beach in Haapniema in Viimsi, and a little pizza place there. So we thought we'd take our kids there. So by lunchtime on our second day in Estonia, we were sat, and it was about 29 degrees Celsius, and we were sat having pizzas by this glorious beach in the sunshine, and there was one of these Airstream sort of van things serving champagne, and it was playing sort of like nice music in the background. And I thought, this is not exactly what I expected coming to the Baltic. And I took a little video, I sort of did a 360-degree video and sent it to my family and all my friends and said, feeling pretty Baltic here in Estonia. And so I wasn't expecting
29 degrees.
Yeah, that summer particularly was incredible. There was about 8 weeks of nice sunshine. The fact you've got these islands, beaches, the nature, the forests, bogs. I never thought I would go swimming in a bog and enjoy it and keep going back. I never thought that I would end up in people's smoke saunas. People I'd met once or twice, I would be naked. I would be lying on my front with them helping me recover from a run that day, whacking me with birch twigs. So a lot of that sort of cultural stuff was pretty new to me. I think also, if I'm really, really honest, before coming here, I thought that certain things would be not as brilliant as they actually are. So to explain that, I guess I thought there would be more things that would be either cold or grey or would feel sort of post-Soviet. So there's this thing that your former president, President Ilves, often complains about, that you're described as this small post-Soviet country or post-communist, etc., which is completely out of date. And maybe that had an effect on me. So maybe I thought there would be more things that would be like that, and was very, very positively surprised that I was, not just in the beach in Viimsi enjoying sunshine, but how well advanced things are here. The fact everything's so clean, your fantastic education system, the fact you've had the best tax system, I think, in the world 7 years in a row. The education system, I think, is incredible with the exam results and so on. So many, many, many largely positive surprises.
So I presume you arrived in July or August then? It
was early June 2010. So it's 2021.
So the video you sent to your family members, I'm sure, convinced some of them to visit. I hope they didn't visit in December of that year.
But your winter is brilliant as well. As long as you're prepared.
As long as you're prepared.
Yeah, and as long as you have a holiday somewhere hot booked for March.
This is getting to be undiplomatic here. Let's change the subject.
Brief holiday.
Brief holiday. Ambassador Kumar, what about your personal sort of experience and surprise?
In my case, I was in a tropical country, Brunei Darussalam. We used to have nice weather, air conditioner all the year round, torrential rain every afternoon. And then my government said that, we are opening our embassy in Tallinn, and we need a pretty senior person. So, we would like you to be there. And we are given a chance to make an option, so I opted for it too. Yes, I was looking at a cold country, having served in Bern. I have had the pleasure of being in Bern for 4.5 years in our embassy. So I thought, okay, going to a cold country, that's all right. I did some reading about your country. My embassy in Finland helped me. They pitched in with all the knowledge. I came in the month of March, and I was least expecting snow in the month of March. And since it was going to be a new resident mission, means I have to be in a hotel for a considerable period of time. Both my house is the hotel as well as my embassy is hotel. So that was a challenge. And then to find everything around, to get your embassy going, to get your house going. But what surprised me is that in the month of May last year, beginning of May, we had snowfall. And that was like, news to me. How can you be having snowfall when India we have 41 degree and 45 degrees? So that was something very unusual for me. The winters, I must say, I do complain. For the first time in my life, my doctor told me, Mr. Kumar, you need vitamin D tablets. Your level has gone down. You are going to get into trouble, not getting younger anymore. So the vitamin D tablets came into play. But that's on the lighter side. I saw a beautiful country. I happened to find my residence in a beautiful locality of Tallinn called Merivalia. The Pirita beach is right there. While finding my location, my residence, I had the chance to see from Nomme to, name me a place in Tallinn which I did not see because I was looking for my house. So I saw all, the beautiful places which you have, both natural and man-made. Your old city really captivated me. I have seen a bit of the world in my 27 years as a diplomat, but Tallinn, being a small city, perhaps has one of the best old towns which I have seen in Europe. Yes, there are bigger towns, but for a small town to have this kind of a beautiful old city and preserve it the way it has been done is fantastic. So kudos to you. It's a UNESCO heritage property. The other thing which I liked about Estonia, and I learned, as rightly said by Ross, somewhere cultural differences also. To go naked in a sauna, for an Indian, it's a cardinal sin to be naked, So we overcame such things. We wore ours. They told us, okay, Mr. Kumar, I can understand that you have inhibition. You can wear your swimming trunks, so no worries. But then, you learn things. You learn while you're on the job, as they say. Estonia has been beautiful. The summers and spring in Estonia are bliss in capital letters. It reminds me of some of the hill locations of India. Your temperature is just appropriate. It's warm, nice and warm in the afternoon, slightly just like now. So it has been a fantastic experience, and I'm very happy to share with you. Because of this, I have invited my father and mother. My father is 84-year-old. He's right now in Tallinn with me just because you have a wonderful weather, while in India we are sweltering. So thank you.
Well, here we are discussing the weather. George, biggest surprise?
I'm wearing short sleeves because I like it this cool. This is the coolest place I've been posted to, so I love the summer weather as well. I did have about 3 months before coming here to focus on learning more about Estonia. It was supposed to be a language class. I think it was mainly a cultural introduction. And I would say that Estonia has arguably, society has changed since my Estonian teacher married an American and moved to the United States 20 years ago. I would say that part of the stereotype of an Estonian about Estonians 20 years ago was that Estonians are closed and introverted. So one of the last conversations we had with our teacher, my wife is a great extrovert. And she said, okay, we're going to arrive in Tallinn, and there's going to be probably a guard in front of the house. And I want to ask, well, how's your wife? How are your kids? And our teacher, whose name is Gaia, and I hope she's not here. She's in Estonia. I hope she's not in the audience. She says, Velida, you can't do that. She says, why not? She says, that's offensive. What happens if they don't want you to know if they have a wife? What happens if they don't have kids? That's their personal issue. You can't ask that. So she actually refused to say what it was. Now, we can use Google and ask the question, and then she said, okay, we have a dog. We're going to take a walk on the dog, and I see somebody who has a dog, and I say Tera, and want to ask what their dog's name is. She says, oh, no, you don't say Tera to someone you don't know already. So that was sort of part of the cultural lessons of an Estonian describing Estonian culture maybe in 1991 or whenever she left. So, of course, we got here, and we arrived, and Velida asked, hey, Tera, how's your wife? Are you married? Do you have kids? And the guard smiled and told us, and we walk along we live in Pirita, so we walk along the water, and she sees someone with a dog and says Tera, and they say Tera. So I think that was a very pleasant affirmation that our instinct to be friendly was reciprocated. And occasionally we've met an introverted person, but there are introverted people in every culture. And I think that is something that has shifted.
I would agree.
And I think maybe you have to leave and come back to see the difference. And the fun part, shortly after I arrived, we had the Estonian National Day at the end of February, and there were many ambassadors who are resident in Helsinki who came down for the event. There's some that are resident in Latvia who came up for the event. And when they heard we just arrived, they said, oh, you are so lucky to be in Estonia. And so we said, why? Estonians are so friendly and open. You should see the Finns. And then
unofficial comment.
I don't think we have our Finnish colleague here. So, and then one of them said, maybe it's because Estonians are a southern people. And I said, only in Finland do you say Estonia are southern people. And the resident ambassadors in Riga said the same thing. You are so lucky to be in Estonia. So I think regardless of maybe Estonian stereotypes about themselves, I think Estonians are much open as a society, and it's not just the people we meet in Tallinn. And I think that's all to the benefit, and we certainly have enjoyed that. Yeah, a couple of, if you will, surprises, whether good or bad, they'd be surprised. This is the first place I've been posted in my 30-year diplomatic career where the cost of food is more expensive than it is in the United States, which I've probably been fortunate in the places I've lived or countries that produced food themselves and the cost of living was much less. But I do wonder for the average Estonian, particularly with inflation, it's expensive to live here. So I'm certainly aware of that issue. I'm positively impressed by the productivity of Estonian bees. I'm a beekeeper. I started in Ukraine. I've kept bees in the United States. My most productive, friendliest, don't sting me bees are the bees here in Estonia. So with 2 hives, I've collected over 160 kilos this year, and those are new beehives. And the first year usually is low production. So I'm giving away lots of honey to friends and family. The other thing is, Pirita is close to the neighborhood of Lasnamäe, which I presume you weren't looking for a house in. I was surprised at how much Russian I hear when I go outside and walk on the streets. Partly it's because of Pirita being right next to Lasnamäe, but I would say when I walk our dog, we hear about 85-90% Russian along the walking coast. So I now know that there is a very large number of Russian-speaking Estonian citizens and residents in the suburbs of Tallinn. So that was a little bit of surprise. I thought they were located up in Ida-Virumaa, Narva primarily, which I guess is one concentration, but I didn't expect to hear quite as much Russian on the streets of Tallinn as I do.
Ambassadors, us not saying hello to people we don't already know is one of the reasons why there's only 1 million of us. One of the reasons. But Ambassador Belén, you might want to address the Finland-Estonia controversy that your American colleague just created, or you might want to just tell us what surprised you most.
Well, I'm posted in Finland, so yeah, I think that you are different, but both have, your very strong assets, so we leave it at that. But I would say that, before coming to Estonia, my approach to Estonia was, we had in the diplomatic academy, we would review the Baltics. There was this big, focus at education, which, we already knew. But before coming, I had met three diplomats from Estonia in the UN, which had left a certain, improntus in myself. They were outstanding diplomats. The first one is Tina Intelman. She's an ambassador, and I was elected to a committee, which is the UNIFEM Consultative Committee. It's a committee for women affairs. It was the precursor of UN Women. And she was the head of this. And I always looked at how she worked there, and with the stamina, I said, well, the Estonians have something. There must be something about the Estonians. Well, that was it. We worked with her for a long time. And then we had UN Women, and she was one of the one of the strongest promoters. So that was an achievement. Then I met another outstanding diplomat, Minna-Liina Lind, who's now very, everywhere here. You all know her, I suppose, from. And we worked with her on an issue that had to do with the Security Council. And she was also working in the campaign of Estonia. And I remember that many countries said, oh, Estonia is so small country. Do you think that they're going to get elected? And we remember you had President Cajulat went to New York. She did her thing, and we worked with Mina in a group that was accountability, coherence, and transparency, and that also left a very strong impronta in me. But then when I came here, there were other. I'm not going to mention the others, but then when I arrived here in Estonia, I could relate. I could understand why they achieved what they achieved, or why you achieved what you achieved, because there is this particular characteristic of the Estonians, as I see it from Latin America. I was posted in Austria before, and it's a very big contrast. You are very stubborn, you believe in what you do, and you get it done. And that is something that I could, see, from the get-go. The other thing is that I think that you have said it very well, is that sometimes we think that Estonians are not very social, which they really are. I've been lost here quite a few times. I come from Helsinki, so I get lost. I'm not very good at maps. And if I don't have my ways or, my thing, I get lost. But every time I have been lost, I have found an Estonian that has took me where I'm going to. They have walked, let's say, 10, 15 blocks. I had never experienced that before. So that is part of your, I think, characteristic, that when you have to be there, you're there. But I don't think that that is something that you could identify from the get-go. And finally, I think going back to the first question, there was something also that happened to me in Chile. We had these dispensers, these package dispensers in very big stores. In Chile, we have one of the biggest retailers in Latin America. It's called Falabella. And bought these dispensers, the package dispensers. And, I had never wondered where it came from. And it's from Estonia, Cleveron. And it's all over Latin America. And nobody knows it's from Estonia, you see? So that is I think the part of branding, maybe you brand the product, but you don't brand sufficiently Estonia, because maybe you're also more into yourselves, or I don't
Honest.
know. But yeah, I don't know. But that was something that struck me. I said, how come we don't know this is Estonian? You know, because we know where Waze is from, but we didn't know. I don't know if that's in Latin America or... So that's kind of something that struck me.
You mentioned modesty, but you also mentioned stubbornness. And I'd like to turn to a bit more political question, but I'll have to tell in a few minutes only a short story before I can ask the question. So every time I meet an Icelandic colleague of mine, I start by thanking him or her for what Iceland did in 1991. And most of you obviously know what Iceland did in 1991. As a tiny country, even smaller than Estonia by population, Iceland was the first to recognize Estonia's re-emergence as a free country on the map of the world. And not wishing to promote commercial interests, but there's a book out by the then Icelandic foreign minister discussing those days, not only those days with regard to recognizing Estonia's independence, but also discussing the role of small states on the international stage. The last time I met, or one of the times I met my direct counterpart in Iceland, I thanked him for what Iceland did in 1991. And he told me, he almost interrupted me, and he told me, and this is not a direct quote, but he basically asked me not to thank him. Because what Iceland did, according to him, was what Iceland's role as a small country on the international stage is. And I'll probably butcher the exact wording, but he said it much more elegantly. What he said was that, look, you know, we're a country of roughly 300,000 people. On absolute terms, we're not contributing much to the betterment of humankind when it comes to scientific breakthroughs or economic development or even, military power solving the problems of the world. We're too small for that, and frankly, even though we small countries like per capita counting, per capita really doesn't matter. When it comes to the betterment of humankind, our contribution isn't that great. We're not smarter than individuals from big countries. We're not more moral than individuals from big countries. We're not more righteous than individuals from large countries, nor is our government any of those things more than the governments of big countries. However, as a small country, we are much less tied down internationally by practical economic geopolitical interests that, whether we want it or not, moderate the political positions that greater powers get to take. I'm not going to name any names, but let's say if you're a country that sits as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council that has military deployments around the world, or that represents companies that do business globally, your government needs to take that into consideration and maybe pause for a day or a month or a year before doing the right thing. So this is where we, small countries, come in. We're not tied down by those practical considerations in many cases. So we get to be the moral lighthouse that gets to speak out first and force the rest of the like-minded world to do the right thing. So this is our contribution to the betterment of humankind. So basically he said, don't thank me, we did the right thing because this is our thing. This is how we contribute. Now back to the stubbornness point and the speeches that we should have listened to Estonia and the Baltic states. We are stubborn, and it oftentimes happens that when we think we're the moral lighthouse of the world and are telling other countries what to do, we may come across as, well, for the lack of a better word, a nuisance. A nuisance. So which one are we, Ambassador? A moral lighthouse or a nuisance on the world stage?
No, I think that Estonia has stood by its principles throughout the history. I go back to the the scarf exhibit. So that it permeates what you have done and what I suppose you're going to continue doing. That doesn't mean, obviously, there are sometimes, it's the way you put forward the message. But obviously, sometimes the message has to be very blunt. So I think that obviously you are a lighthouse and you speak from experience. So I think that is very important. The small countries have assets, and these assets have to be put forward in this multilateral arena, which you have done very well, and I think that you can continue doing. I think there are two elements that go with you also, is the fact that Estonia is a very legalistic country, in spite of being very, you do your thing, but you're also you stick to international rules and to international procedures. So that's a very strong asset, and you have put it forward in the international arena. So I think that probably there's a very strong space. You have been also strong in the ICC, for example. So there is another space where you're a lighthouse there. You have been, at least for my country, you have shown the respect for human life in general, not only because you had to endure something, but because you believe it and you're convinced. So going back to certain discussions we have heard today, I think that there you have become a beacon. On the other side, you have been working on accountability, which is very important. How you do it, I think that's maybe there are certain, ways that sometimes there are countries that are probably a little bit reluctant to go in that direction. But at the same time, I think that you have to endure that, because that is a very strong asset you already have. So I think Estonia can offer that. I think that you can continue doing that. And there is something now, looking at the audience, is about civil society. We have this festival, and I think that that is something that Estonia could maybe work a little bit more, in the international arena. This partnership which you have done very well, maybe in the environmental, with the cleanup day, which was a very big success. Now they're doing it in Chile and in other countries, and this came forward. It was a joint venture. Civil society and the government believed in this initiative. So that also can be done with accountability, with with any initiatives that you want to put forward. But you have probably the liberty to do it, because when you're a small country, it has happened to Chile also. If you're a small country, you have more leverage. Nobody's going to be pointing at you. Sorry, but if it's UK or the US or India, they're going to be put in the spotlight. While Estonia can, you can navigate very well, and I think you have that advantage. It's an asset. So you need to go further, and I think Estonia can also make a very good advantage of, these high-ranking officials, the secondment for certain organizations. We need more Estonians in those organizations. That's why I wanted to point out these other people so well prepared. We need them in these organizations. I'd rather have prepared people than people that are not providing. And then we heard some discussions about the Security Council recently, and I think that there you also have something to offer. So I think that Estonia is a lighthouse and can obviously improve in many areas. So those are things that I see. I've been 1 year posted, so it's not so much that I can say.
Thank you. Ambassador Kent?
I would say not all small countries behave the same way. I think
the same can be said of big countries.
It could be, but your question is about small countries. So I would actually, I'll bifurcate because I don't think all small countries act the same way. I think a lot of small countries feel that they don't have any agency or power, and therefore they just accept conditions and look to avoid responsibility. I think other small countries seek a role to shape the decisions of others. I used the expression thought leader before. I don't think every small country is a thought leader. I don't think every small country seeks that role. I think Estonia does. I've served in Southeast Asia for a number of years. Singapore is one of the smallest countries in Southeast Asia. It is arguably the most influential country, not by numbers, but by force of personality, not just Lee Kuan Yew, but an ethos of projecting ideas and seeking to influence. And so I think I think it's conscious. Partly it's probably because of history and understanding that you survived occupation, depending on how you want to define it, 800 years. We're in a place that has a very, I think, treasured role in a negative sense of Estonian history and what happened after the St. George's Uprising. And yet, even though the 4 Estonian peasant kings were executed here by the head of the Teutonic Knights Order, Estonia survived. That was 680 years ago. So I think it's driven by a sense of identity. And I think that is admirable. I would say that I mentioned the comment about dealing with inflation. In many ways, Estonia, as a small country, is a price taker. You can't move commodities. You have to accept certain market realities. But in others, when it comes to ideas and innovation, you're a market maker. So you may have to be a price taker on commodities that drives inflation, but you're a market maker when it comes to innovation and new ideas. So I think that's 2 parts of what it means to be small and using your strengths for progress. And so I think that's where I would sort of say that the small country that is Estonia plays a much larger role than its size suggests. Its success offers another challenge because I think Estonia as a nation survived 800 years. It's been so successful in the last 30 years that now you face the dilemma of success as a small country, which is where are the people who are going to take the jobs to fuel the success for the next 30 years. Same way of digitization. You succeed, but then what? You have to keep moving forward. And so the jobs that are needed to be done in a successful country, in a society, require workers that simply don't exist in numbers. A country like the US has an answer, and it's immigration. Poland and Germany in the last 15 years have become societies that rely on immigration to meet its needs. Is that an answer for Estonia? That's a question that Estonians have to answer. But I think that's a chief challenge, an opportunity for Estonia. How do you define success on your terms?
Ambassador Kumar?
We have heard some very interesting remarks on this question. But I would like to reflect in a manner which is rather practical. Because you were a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council for the 2-year term 2020-2021. And it just so happened that India too, for the 8th time, was a non-permanent member for the term 2021 and 22. So 1 year together, we were there at the high table, as it is called, in international parlance. And we saw a responsible country, Estonia, play its role and deliver on subjects. Remember, we were in the times of COVID and the pandemic, etc. How something like cybersecurity and digitization was brought on the table of the United Nations. Between our 2 delegations, between the Indian delegation and the Estonian delegation, we saw a lot of cooperation, whether it was on peacekeeping, international terrorism, and other subjects. So I'm convinced that small states, which form majority of the Committee of Nations, if we are talking about the Committee of Nations today, it's 193 countries in the United Nations. And primarily, we see a big segment, a big chunk of them are smaller countries and island countries. So they have a role to play, and they have a seminal role to play. I would like to take some time to dwell on this subject because when the United Nations was conceptualized and it came to existence, there were 51 members, and the membership was rather limited to 10. 5 permanent and 5 non-permanent. We see an expansion in the year 1965 when 5 more non-permanent members are included. Now, by this time, a lot of countries had achieved its independence and the size of the United Nations had grown, the membership. India, as we speak, is 16% plus population of the entire world. And we feel it that not having India in the Security Council in today's world is anachronistic. I mean, you are negating 16% of the world on that table. Now, what we say, and that is where the small states come into importance, that the United Nations needs a reform in totality, including its working methods, as well as the reform of the Security Council, where there would be expansion of more permanent members and non-permanent members. We have the G4, a grouping where we have countries like Brazil, Japan, and Germany, as well as India. And so it is time that we have a reformed United Nations which reflects the world in which we live today. And in such a world, when the membership expands, we would like to see, today the Security Council is of the 15 countries which are there on the table. The presidency rotates every month in alphabetical order. Now, in an expanded Security Council, also to bring space for small states, we would like to see that each one of them gets a chance to be the president for a brief while. So what a country like mine propels, and it is also the convincing view of the majority in the Committee of Nations, is that the relevance of small states will continue. What we need to see is that they get a place on such platforms which are decisive. And I'm not only talking about the United Nations, I'm talking about WTO, IMF, World Bank, you name it. Multilateral bodies which make decisions for the world as we speak. So, yes, and here again, I would like to point out 2 aspects. During your non-permanent membership, you made very good use of the RE formula, the meetings. You also were co-pen holders on Afghanistan. So what I see is that the bigger countries are willing to give you and others a platform. It is how you capitalize on that. And I think you did pretty well. So I really see that not only Estonia, all small states and island states, I think they have a major role to play. And for that, it is a sine qua non that the international body in which we all believe and respect, the United Nations, have to be reformed and be reflective of the 21st century in which we live as on date. Thank you.
You have first applause of the panel, which could be outdone by His Majesty's ambassador.
I can try.
But as we're running short on time, nuisance or moral lighthouse in 2 or 3 minutes.
So 3 really quick points about small countries. First of all, I don't know, have a think to yourselves what percentage of the world's population you think the UK is. I'll only give you a couple of seconds because we're pressed for time. But we are 0.84% of the world's population. And I think we could argue that small countries can have a very big impact on the world in lots of different ways throughout our history, whether military power in the past or soft power. The Premier League resumes tomorrow. From Shakespeare to Harry Potter, etc. And I think you have lots of similar things going for you in Estonia. So I think being small isn't necessarily a handicap. The second thing I wanted to say was when I started learning Estonian a few months in, I asked my teacher at some point, I said, can you tell me what is the verb in Estonian for to praise? And she laughed and she said, you won't need that. And then eventually she relented and told me what it was. I think it's kiitma. And she said, you won't need that because we don't really do that. And I often think that Estonians sometimes need foreigners to come in and tell them how fantastic Estonia is. I think occasionally...
That's what this panel is, right?
Yeah, that's what this panel's on.
We organize this for it.
like my water, you can sometimes be a tiny bit glass half empty, or one of my favorite Estonian words, tagasi hoidlik. But Estonia's fantastic, so don't be shy about telling the world about the things that you're good at, and that could be your tech, or your stance and support for Ukraine, or the education system, or nature. Tourism here. I was looking, the next smallest country in the world by population is Cyprus. And loads of British people know Cyprus probably better than they know Estonia because they've been there. Because they go there every year in their hundreds of thousands for tourism. Let's get that same number of people from the UK coming to Estonia because it's brilliant. So small bit about praise and bigging yourselves up a bit more. And then final point about maybe being small. I was thinking back to one of your neighbours, one of your close friends, the Lithuanians. If you're going to take a really sort of bold stance in the world and you're small, it's quite important to have allies. So you think back to, I think it was last year or the year before, Lithuania took a pretty bold approach in terms of China and Taiwan and so on. I don't think Lithuania would have done that if they weren't in the EU and they weren't in NATO and they didn't know that they had the backing of their friends and their allies. But the good news for you is that you have that. You have pretty much the same allies as Lithuania, and that includes us. We're really, really proud to be your ally. So briefly from me, use us as an example. We're not that much bigger. We're smaller than Montana. You can achieve an enormous amount in the world, and I think carry on being a lighthouse, carry on being vocal, because on most of these issues we agree with you, and we would like to hear more from you. And quick response: the Indian ambassador. We support reform of the United Nations in the UK. We would like to see India, Brazil, Japan, and African representation on the UN Security Council. So we basically agree with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
So let's go to the... as the evening is progressing, the bar is open. And we're becoming less and less Nordic. But let's go to the audience. I think this is the appropriate time now. We have microphones somewhere. We have microphones here. If you want to ask a question of the distinguished panel, raise your hand. I won't be able to see you, but the people with microphones hopefully will. So they will just hand the individuals who want to ask a question a microphone, and then I will be able to, we'll all be able to hear the question. In English, please, and if at all possible, don't give a speech limited to a question. And we'll take, let's say, 3 questions, and then the ambassadors get to pick which one they won't answer.
Right, so as my friends tend to tell me that I take a long time to getting to point B from point A, then I wrote it down. So first of all, thank you for this panel. Of course, we love to hear compliments. One little side story, like my best friend of 14 years came to visit me for the first time in Estonia. And after this week that she was here, I asked her how she feels about our country. And she kept on talking about nice things, and I just really did not want her to stop. So the past 1 hour has been great. Coming to my question, though, true, we are known as the digital powerhouse and e-governance, as you all mentioned. Also true, to keep this standard of ourselves, we need to keep investing in it. But even though we love compliments, we also would like to think we have even more potential. So what are the chances you as experts see that we're kind of missing out on or are not taking? Might it be in the green energy area or the sky's the limit? So
right.
Please.
Got it. That's question number one. Please memorize it. I wrote it down. So can we get a few more, if we have any? We have. I can see the front row there. We have a hand over there. A gentleman in the front row. In the front row.
Yes, thank you. And I have maybe a similar question about our chances. And as an Estonian, I know how much we love to compare ourselves with our neighbors. So I'm wondering, what can we learn from our neighbors, especially Latvia and Lithuania, to which we have really similar history and culture. And also regarding this, maybe especially public relations, would the public statements actually be even more powerful if we did it together with our neighbors, like that we wouldn't see our Estonian Prime Minister in the media, but a statement from the Baltic states? Maybe should we do it more, and would it have more effect on other countries? Thank you.
Got it. And if we have, then we'll take one more. We have in the front row here.
So a quick question, what do you think of the odds of our Prime Minister Kaja Kallas being maybe the next Secretary General of NATO?
Okay, so we have the three questions, and we'll do random order, whichever one you want to answer. I presume the NATO allies would want to answer the NATO question, or perhaps the non-NATO countries would like to answer that one as well. But the way I understood them, what are we missing? Any advice for us? And perspective for more regional cooperation and regional marketing of us in your countries. Shall we start? I've forgotten which way we went.
Can I take the first one?
Yeah.
I'll have a go at the first one. So the question, I think, was what you're missing out on. Effectively, we said lots of things you're doing brilliantly, and your question was a good challenge, like what could you do better? Hopefully, given how much I've demonstrated, how much I love Estonia already, I'm allowed, therefore, to be a tiny bit, not critical, but to answer your question genuinely and say what I think could be done better. I think you could do the green transition faster. I think there's a sense of maybe shared frustration among a lot of Estonians that you're not further along the green transition than you could be. There was a period where there was a bit of a pause, things maybe didn't happen fast enough. So I'd say do that faster. I think there's an issue around the gender pay gap. I think you could tackle that. I think it would be a good thing to tackle the gender pay gap properly here. There's a specific thing on that, which is you give an annual prize to like the entrepreneur of the year, and not you personally, Jonatan, but the panel that decides. I think
the audience knows.
The panel that decides who gets that prize has never given that to a female entrepreneur, which I think in a country with lots of fantastic female entrepreneurs and female founders, that is wrong. That should be better. But to end on a positive note, congratulations on passing equal marriage legislation, which I think was a fantastic step forward. Palju õnne. I think that's superb, but more steps in that direction would be brilliant.
And the NATO Secretary General question, Risky?
I think Kaja Kallas would make a brilliant Secretary General, but it's been the process has been postponed till next year. And I think she said it. I don't think she's been offered the job, and there's a sort of strange process of choosing new secretaries general. But I'm sure she would be brilliant at that job, or maybe other international jobs as well.
Ambassador Kumar.
I will start with. I haven't, to be very honest, I haven't seen much of the countries so far, occupied with setting up the mission. But two areas where I see huge potential, perhaps which needs to be focused. One is you have done wonderfully well on e-health. So all the digital architecture is there. What I would like to see Estonia do better, And you have started in a small way, but it can be done much better in personalized medicine. You have got the DNA data. You have created a data bank, and it is only a matter of time when, with due research and development on this particular stuff and genomics, a niche area called personalized medicine, which takes care of medical requirements for the future. It's person-oriented, can be developed in your country. The second potential area for sure is green hydrogen. And there, India gives you a massive scale because we plan to become one of the major players, both as producers, user, and exporter of green hydrogen, which is backed by renewable energy. So for Estonia, where you have started well, you have started running your buses, etc., in the campus, there's a huge, huge potential in waiting. When I look at something which is failing, which draws my attention, it is Estonia not marketing well. And I'll give you one small platform. You have this wonderful annual film festival called POF. Now, POF is not only for screening films. You are a digital, knowledgeable, innovative country. Can we translate that knowledge into advertisement, design, marketing, film production, editing, etc.? All that goes with that. So PUF and a little bit exposure to this institution can create a market potential for Estonia in tourism, as well as in developing these new industries, which to me, except for all these unicorn and startup, I don't see the service industry. So it can propel Estonia because you have the workforce, you have the knowledge. It's just that the platforms are missing. So these are my two-piece advice and shortcomings which I noticed which can be worked upon. Thank you.
George?
In terms of opportunity, about 6 weeks ago, I went out to Narva and for a groundbreaking ceremony for a factory which doesn't exist outside of Asia, and that's rare earth magnets, which are the core driver for electric vehicles and wind turbines. And a Canadian company that used to be an American company before bankruptcy is building it. And even at their expected second phase of hundreds of millions of dollars in investment, that will only supply 20% of the demand in Europe, which is now 100% sourced in China. There are not enough Estonian experts in magnetics to staff the trained jobs right now, and starting a program that will create bachelor's and master's degrees will take 5 years. So the first phase will finish in 2 years, the second phase will finish in 5 years, and Estonia will have to import expertise because it doesn't exist in Estonia. And similar sort of area, which is still to be determined whether Estonia decides to choose, is nuclear power as part of the green transition. It's up to the government to decide whether they're going to embrace that as part of the energy mix. But again, there aren't the experts to do the regulation that would be necessary for one of the answers potentially to meet Estonia's needs in industry, as well as potentially then for the hydrogen production. So I think that issue of when you make an assessment, Estonians are fantastic about relentlessly pursuing what's necessary. But this investment in the knowledge that will create the next generation type of technologies, which in the case of rare earths magnets doesn't exist outside of Asia at this point, could be a challenge. I will stop. That could be actually met through investment in new programs of education. In terms of the identity, when it's good to work together or have your own branding, I think actually the 3 Baltic countries realize that there's strength in numbers And they work very well together, particularly if we're looking at how engaging the U.S. government in Washington, as Jonatan knows, as the ambassador in Washington. Sometimes it's difficult to get on the calendar for certain leaders or certain bodies consistently, just as a single country. And I think the 3 Baltic ambassadors, 3 Baltic presidents, and other sort of constellations have very effectively worked together to engage us. So I think that's an example where it's happening, and it's because it makes sense. The flip side of that is if you're always together, then it's sometimes hard to distinguish where you have value added. I think leaders of countries need to work as allies, but they have to also speak up forthrightly for their interests. And I think the buzz or the interest in the current Estonian Prime Minister, Kallas, as a potential leader of an organization at a higher level is in part because she is so articulate. And in particular, the last 2 years, she's gone on BBC frequently. She's on CNN and other US publications, explaining the case not only for what it is important for Estonia, but for what is important for the wider world. And that's why many people see her as a leader of not just Estonia, but potentially an international organization. As Ross said, the decision-making process that requires consensus means that representatives of individual countries can give a very positive assessment. In the case of NATO, we need 28, 29, 31, 32 when Sweden becomes a member. And so it's a complicated process that will be picked up next year in Washington. Ambassador Belén?
Well, yes, I think that mainly everything has been said, but I would summarize, on the first question. Yes, I think that Estonia can do more in other areas, but building up from what already has. For example, artificial intelligence. I think there's also a very important niche where Estonia can deliver. Then on education, Estonia's third place. We have China, I think Singapore, China, and then Estonia. So I think that Estonia can also export that know-how. This morning we saw a magnificent school. The design of the school, the way the programs are designed by the directors, etc. So I would say that the education is also something that you can export and further deliver. And then I would say that on the role on NATO, I'm not going to get into NATO because we're not NATO, but I really believe that Estonian women have a lot to say, and that in the international arena, you have great, women. You have ex-President Kajulat, who was here this morning. I believe that she could be somewhere, I don't know where. The same Kallas. You have very important women that could deliver in the international arena. And just to close, I think that on clean energy and renewables, I think Estonia has everything to just rely on renewables. I mean, you have to, scale up a little bit, maybe, press yourselves and do it. Chile is doing it also. So I think that there's a lot that can be done also with all these countries that are working with offshore, inshore energy, for example, wind, which you have, eolic. So I think that there's a lot of space to deliver in. And working together, I think the Baltics, when the Baltics come together, they have a stronger voice in the international arena. So I think that that is something that could be further explored. It's not that it wouldn't help.
So I'm perfectly aware of the fact that we are running out of time, but I couldn't let our panel off after having exploited them for an hour and a half here and pretty much asked them to praise Estonia for those hour and a half, without giving them an opportunity to address or to tell their story. And very, very briefly, in 1 minute or less, I'd like each ambassador to tell us about either the greatest misconception of your country that you've come across here in Estonia, or something that we don't know but should know about your country, or perhaps something that we know but know so mistakenly about your country? What is it that you want to teach us? Tell us your story, Ambassador Belén. And then going down from you, water.
Well, really, personally, I think it's more of an issue with Latin America in general. It's not only my country. It's that obviously there's a divide, you know, because sometimes I think that Estonians might believe that all Latin Americans are in a certain way, which we're not. You know, we're a land of immigrants. We're a land of indigenous people. We have, you know, we're very diverse. And sometimes it's we are kind of categorized as salsa dancers, which we are, bachata dancers, which we are, but also, you know, we have our differences. So, and as you mentioned Antarctica, when you started, I would say Chile, for example, is a country that is a co-claimant with the UK for Antarctica. We are next to Antarctica. And when we say that we have bases in the Antarctica, nobody believes us because they think that Chile is kind of this warm, you know, like tropical country, which we're not. So I think that is something of, misconception. But all in all, I think the Estonians know quite well our region. You know, I think that is why you're in third place or whatever in education.
Ambassador Kent?
I think it's hard for me to find something that Estonians don't know about America. I was driving in a different part of Estonia this morning, and we were out in the middle of nowhere, and I stopped off at a little food stand, and they had a cowboy hat with the imprint of the American flag on that. And so I think I was walking...
That's what you all wear.
I do not have a cowboy hat at home. I have a pair of cowboy boots, though. As I was walking up here this afternoon, I heard jazz being played, live jazz by a trumpeter here in Paide. Jazz was an American music form, but it has been embraced and internalized by musicians all around the world as a way of individual expression. So I'm happy to see cowboy hats on fast food stands across Estonia and hear jazz being played live in clubs. And that's, I think, that sort of cultural encounter where people can take the best, they can challenge what they don't like. And this has been a polite audience, but, you know, exchange of opinions, we don't always have to agree. But I'm very comfortable with where the Estonian-US mutual understanding is.
Ambassador Kumar?
Estonia knows India quite well. The India of the past knows yoga. I was pretty surprised by the number of yoga studios, which are all around Tallinn and Tartu and other cities. They know Bollywood. And of course the Indian cuisine. But what I found slightly wanting was the knowledge about the new India. The new India, which is the 5th biggest economy of the world. On purchasing power parity, it is the 3rd biggest economy in the world as we speak. The new India, which is hopefully, and I really pray that we succeed, is going to be landing a rover on the dark side of the moon very shortly on 23rd August. An India which is the generic capital of the world. An India where in the last 9 years, we have elevated 450 million people from poverty to a scale where they each have a house, education, health, etc. So this is the new India. An India which has got 50% of the population. That means roughly we are talking about 700 million people, which is 25 years and younger. Now, this is the population which is going to propel India. I can keep on announcing, but this is the India which is known to people who have traveled, but in the general public, the information was not available. When I interacted and I talked about our parliament, And I told them that in my parliament, 22 languages are spoken, and any member of the House can speak in his language, and the rest get, at the moment, simultaneous interpretation, much before the European Union even experimented with it. People had no idea. So I think it is the numbers, But this is, otherwise I find the Estonians having very good memories from the past. Historically, they are well read. And I hope that with the embassy setting space in Tallinn, our engagement will make them much more knowledgeable about India.
And last but not least, Ross.
Thank you. So I think the most common misconceptions are probably that we have terrible food and terrible weather. Both the food and the weather are much better than people think in the UK. And my encouragement would be a bit like the ambassador from Tšiili around the diversity of the UK. So people here in the audience may have visited London at some point, maybe one or two other places in the UK. But we have 4 nations: Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and England. Within all of them, big diversity as well between our cities and our countryside. So I would say, if you haven't visited or you've only visited once, come and visit us again. This is my sales pitch for the UK. Come and study. We have 3 of the world's top 10 universities. I think, George, the other 7 are in the US, so well done. But continue looking to come and study in the UK, and also, trade with us, invest with the UK. There's lots and lots going on sort of economically. And another big part of my job, apart from security and the troops that we have here, is also about boosting, bilateral trade and investment between the 2 countries. So visit us, study in the UK, trade with us, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, stick around for the cultural program to begin shortly. But before, please join me in thanking this outstanding panel for praising Estonia for an hour and a half. Thank you.
You have a lot of friends.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.
Aitäh.